Hello there, AP Human Geography students. Let's keep talking about industry in the modern world. So you always got to worry about where are you going to build your factory or start your business. Because as I've said, if you run a primary style business, you have to really consider the land, okay? You can't run an oil derrick in land where there's no oil. You can't have a lumber yard where there's no trees. It's just not possible. But when it comes down to where will you put your factory to process the, I don't know, oil, the lumber, the food, whatever you're processing into a product to sell, you really can put the factory in a more convenient place that is not fully tied to the land as much. And then also, like, where are you going to sell your product? Ideally, you're going to sell your product in a city where there's a lot of people who could buy it. But nowadays, potentially with the internet, you can kind of connect to anybody and just ship your product all across the country or across the world. So there's a lot of new questions that get popped up about location. So let's check it out. So this is a location of new steel mills. So new steel mills are popping up in, well, roughly the Midwest. And, well, guess what? It's because whereas there are a lot of iron ore in these northern states, whereas there's a lot of coal in these Midwest middle states. So it sort of makes sense that new steel mills pop up all around here during the early 1900s and late 1800s. Makes a lot of sense. And then, the geography of steel. Let's look at this one. So this is in the UK. So what do you need for steel? Limestone, iron, and coal. You can get all three of those things right near the city of Scunthorpe. I hope I said that right. So that's why the central part of the UK here, Leeds, Sheffield, to a degree Manchester, they had everything you needed to be an awesome steel manufacturing zone. Okay, welcome to the middle of nowhere. Probably not a good place to build a business or a factory. Probably got to be a little closer to more of the action. Okay, and that's what Donald Trump says. Location equals money. All right, and choosing the best location for your business. Got to factor in a whole lot of stuff. Where are you going to put your business? We're going to talk about that. Okay, so the Industrial Revolution. This is sort of the start of how the economy works in the modern world today. You should have got a lot of this from your homework, but I'm going to talk about it right now too. So the Industrial Revolution, it began in Britain in the 1780s, and it sort of went through the 1850s. It was still kind of inventing stuff. And the Industrial Revolution spread to Europe and the United States. And if you remember, the Second Agricultural Revolution started just before this. And because all these farmers were freed up because machines were replacing them on the farms, these farmers are like, what are we going to do for a job? And people in Britain are like, work in a factory, yo. So a bunch of people got new jobs in these new factories. And the idea is that humans are using machines to offset their labor, and through these machines, they're going to make products really, really efficiently. And a lot of these early industrial machines, they were powered by steam and coal. They used a lot of iron to make goods, and demand for raw materials continued to increase, which led through these historical developments. And hey, if you have me in AP World next year, I'll teach you all about this stuff. And these European countries that started to industrialize, they're going to take over countries in Africa and Asia to get the raw materials they needed for their factories. And so that's the legacy of the Industrial Revolution. It kind of set the Western world on top and Sub-Saharan Africa and developing Asia on the bottom. And to some degree, that historical process even continues to this day, where Europeans stay on top, rest of the world not so much. Okay, Industrial Revolution. Okay, so this was the majority of the world in Europe, America, and Japan. Japan got into the industrial game pretty early too. So here's just some black and white pictures you see between 1890 and 1960. This was our world. Well, why did it change? Where'd the factories go? Will the factories be there forever? Because here's a whole bunch of white people working on machines, building stuff. Here's some Japanese people building stuff. You don't see this so much anymore today. Today, where are most things made? Hopefully, their things are made in China. So the factories kind of moved over to China. And Well, why did they move? That's a great question, and I answer it in a deep, deep way in one of my future presentations. But the short of it is that American workers and Japanese workers got too expensive. Chinese workers said, we'll work in those factories for $2 an hour. But as time goes on, these Chinese workers will demand more and more money, so those factories in China will eventually move to parts of developing Asia. And those workers in Bangladesh and Myanmar and India, they will continue to work, and they'll eventually demand more wages. And then the factories will move to sub-Saharan Africa, maybe Latin America, and then eventually they'll demand more and more work. And then there's nowhere else for the factories to go. So the world where factories are wouldn't be as big of an issue. But once again, it comes down to land, labor, capital. And if you can find cheap labor and you don't care about the land or the capital, well, you're going to go to where there's real cheap labor. Okay, let's check out some of these pictures. So these are these early factories back in the day. Here's some Europeans working on a factory line. Here they are making stuff, doing stuff in Japan, and then factory life. Children working. Man, that's pretty hardcore. Okay, so why is it that everybody makes stuff in factories? Because factories is basically the whole secondary sector of the economy. Well, factories are really awesome because of this concept called the economy of scale. Factories will always be more efficient than individual workers. And it largely has to do with the fact that a lot of things that we make in factories are really complicated. And if you try to teach one person to make all the pieces of a cell phone, that person's going to be overwhelmed with the sheer amount of knowledge they would need to input the camera properly and input the touchscreen properly, input all the microchips in the right place. So instead, factories work like this. They have one person and they're like, okay, you're going to be the camera guy. The only thing you're going to do is properly insert the camera into the cell phone. Then you're going to pass it on. Okay, the next person, your whole job is to deal with the touchscreen. You're going to make the touchscreen on, you're going to make sure it's flat and it's perfect and polished, and then you're going to move it on to the next guy. And so that one person will put in 1,000 cameras a day, the one guy will put in 1,000 touchscreens a day, and they'll do it very efficiently and very effectively. So that's why the economy of scale is such an incredible concept. And that's why, there's a factory in China, I don't know when I'll talk about it, but I will, called Foxconn. Foxconn has 250,000 people working in that one building every day. And I'm just like, wow, that's amazing. That building must be the size of 4 stadiums. So, holy cow, that's wild. And if we were in the classroom, we would do this activity where I would show you kids how the economies of scale is so effective. Well, we got to pass that in online learning. So let's keep it going. Okay, so economies of scale. You can buy things bigger. You can reduce things. You can promote. Everything's cheaper. Yeah, it's when you're a big giant company and you can hire thousands of employees, you can make stuff in the drop of a hat. But when it's just you or just you and your few employees, it's a whole lot harder to have a big operation for sure. Okay, so what do you got here? So labor economics, marketing economics, yeah, everything just becomes cheaper and more effective. Okay, and then here's people working in these giant assembly lines building stuff for you. Okay, so now let's talk about how industrialization spread around the world. Well, industrialization started in the UK, and then it diffused to Western Europe, then the USA, then Japan. So those countries definitely got into the industrial game real early on. They were the only industrialized areas of the world until 1960, when other East Asian countries got factories too. To some degree, the former Soviet Union had some industrialization, but nothing compared to what the United States had. So, so factories and industrialization spreading is still a relatively new thing in our world. But I expect in the next 40, 50 years, we will start to see more products that say made in India and made in Brazil and made in Mexico. And that will just continue to be the case in the world economy. Okay, so spreading out of industrialization, where are their factories? Where are things being made? And as we know today, a whole lot of stuff says made in China. And that's really recent in world history. So major manufacturing centers in Europe, so a whole lot in the UK and France and Germany in northern Italy, little bits in Spain, some in Sweden, some in Poland and Czech Republic. But there's not a lot of stuff that's made in the Balkan region of Europe. And this is one of the poorest parts of Europe as well. So, gotta build stuff, kids. That's important. Okay, so this was America's old manufacturing center. As we see, this huge swath of the United States, the entire Midwest, used to be this amazing manufacturing center. We used to build things for the entire world right here. But nowadays, so many of these old factories are closed. It's really sad and depressing. What do we do with that part of the United States now? That's a great question, and I don't think anybody has an easy answer. It's just rough. Okay, and why geographically? Why was this our manufacturing center? Well, it's because there's all these major rivers around here. I mean, you can sail ships along the Great Lakes and go right into the Atlantic Ocean. A lot of coal is near here, and coal is used to power the machines. So this is a very logical place for us to have our industrial center in the United States. Okay, and then, yeah, it's cool to see where else there were some industrial centers near Seattle, Portland, San Diego, LA, San Francisco. Couple little slots here, but this definitely was the core region of American productivity. Okay, let's talk about poverty. Ugh, so sad. Poverty is the state of being extremely poor. And the thing is, so how poor are we talking about, Mr. Brown? Well, it's a relative term. We only can compare people across the world. Because if we say a poor person in the United States could still be making minimum wage, a poor person here could still be making $20,000 a year. But if I compare a poor person in the United States poverty to someone in Somalia's poverty, the comparison isn't even realistic because the person in Somalia is going to be kind of living this lifestyle here. So it's going to be real rough. And now let's talk about some more scientific ways of measuring stuff. So HDI is this 3 dimensions of human welfare. HDI measures the longevity, so the life expectancy of a person. It measures the knowledge, the access to education literacy rates, and it measures the GDP per capita. So it's that number again where they sort of divide it by all the people in the country. And it also talks about purchasing power parity, or PPP. And PPP is just sort of saying, can you afford these basic goods? Like, can you afford rice? Can you afford bread? Can you live in some kind of shelter in a solid concrete foundation? So HDI is a significantly better, more scientific term to say than just these people are in poverty, because poverty in the United States, people, still can live and can eat and can get by. Poverty in parts of Africa is more or less meaning that you only got a couple weeks left before the end comes. So it's real rough in certain parts of the world. Okay, so let's check out some of these concepts of poverty. Oh, come on. I thought I was going to throw that in there. Oh, maybe I'll come back to this. All right, so HDI stresses people and their capabilities as a measure of the country. It's not economic growth. It's created by India and Pakistan. Oh, yeah, here's the thing. HDI is always measured between 0 to 1. So I think you will see this in a couple test questions. Above 0.8 is highly developed. Under 0.6 is low developed. So most of the world is under 0.6. So be thankful you live in the United States. There's mapping the HDI. So actually, I don't know. It says most, it looks like most of the world is high. But actually, when you consider the populations of the world, most of the world is medium or low. And it's pretty much divided by regional lines. The West is very high. The Far East is very high. Developing Asia is kind of middle, probably, I would even argue lower. The Arab world is generally considered quite high. I'm surprised that Libya, Algeria are on this list. The Latino world is quite high, but Sub-Saharan Africa is where the money is lacking. Okay, so this is serious poverty in parts of Africa. You can see this guy's living in some pretty terrible poverty. That's his house for his 2 kids. These people are drinking out of some offshoot water. I'm sure this is really gross and going to cause some diseases. These people, I mean, like, they're happy, but they're living in this kind of shack here. So, and then yep, here's some. These are Europeans, but you see their level of poverty is probably quite different than other people's levels of poverty. Here's some kids feeding themselves. So yeah, American poverty is what it says at the bottom right there. At least they got food. And these people are, living the rough life. Okay, so economic development. These are more of these concepts to talk about in this lesson today. It's the measure of human welfare. So GDP is the gross domestic product. It's the value produced in a country during a time period. And the GNP is the value produced in a time period plus net property and income from abroad. So the only two differences between these terms is sort of like saying, how much money did the United States make last year? If you look at GDP, you look at everybody who's in the United States and you say, okay, how much total money did all of them make added together? GNP would always be more than GDP because it's going to be GDP plus the amount of Americans who made money in other countries as well. Like, for example, when I lived in South Korea and I was working in South Korea, I still had my American passport. So I was not helping the GDP of the United States, but I was helping the GNP because I was, helping out from abroad. And let's talk about some countries where these numbers are going to be wildly different. Interesting fact, 25% of all Mexican citizens live and work in the United States. So Mexico's GDP is going to be kind of low, but its GNP is going to be way higher because so many Mexican nationals make their money here in the US, and that can be sort of factored into Mexico's GNP, not their GDP. And it would be a quite similar thing to, I know that actually China, there's a whole lot of Chinese that have moved around the world. So if someone still claims Chinese nationality, China's GNP would be way bigger than its GDP. Okay, boom. Moving on. So yep, GDP, gross domestic product, the goods, the exports, the things you produce, services. Okay, and then here's manufacturing by country. As we see here, once you get to like 2006, China's manufacturing just keeps going way up. And China's manufacturing, it's been going up since the 1980s. But something I got to make real clear to you kids is China made almost nothing back in the 1970s. China did not have manufacturing in the 1970s. And now, 50 years later, they are the super manufacturing country of the world. And it looks like they overtook the USA in manufacturing in 2009. And I don't think America's ever gonna get back there for a while. So, China, you're the winner. Congratulations. But yeah, and so yeah, these other countries. Well, it looks like most countries in the world, their stuff's going up. Germany surprisingly went down. I didn't expect that. But all the countries in the world are making more stuff. China's just doing it at a really fast rate. And then this is GDP around the world. So we see America real big, China real big, Japan, India, Germany, all real big. Some of these Western countries, but a lot of Latin American countries, GDPs ain't so big, and Africa's GDPs basically aren't even there. Ugh, that's rough. Okay. All right, let's talk about agglomeration. This is a fun word. So agglomeration, or functional areal specialization, is where all of one industry is located in the same area. So it's sort of like you got one spot in a country or in a city or maybe even in the world where just all the products or all the concept that we're talking about can be found together. So for example, in the Midwest United States, that's where we had almost all of our car factories. Most of them are closed today. A lot of tech companies are found in Silicon Valley. A lot of movie companies are found in Hollywood in Los Angeles, California. So why I don't know why I wrote that. Why is this a good idea? How could it be a bad idea? So let me talk about sort of both sides of agglomeration right now. So agglomeration is, let's talk about how it could be a bad idea first. It's when all of the movie companies are right next to each other, they could be competing a lot for the same actors and the same cameramen. And also, like, they're always going to have to, like, travel all over the world to do movie shoots. So maybe it would be more effective to split them all up. Sort of the same thing with tech companies in Silicon Valley. Like, wouldn't you potentially, I don't know, overload internet access if just every single person in your city works for tech companies? Maybe that's a bad idea. What else could be a bad idea about it? Let's just talk about agglomeration of casinos, okay? Because Las Vegas has that. Wouldn't it just make more logical sense to spread the casinos around the Vegas Valley rather than have them all on Las Vegas Boulevard? Because Las Vegas Boulevard, the land there is so expensive. Every casino wants to be next to the other big casinos. So if they went to other parts of the valley, they could save a whole lot of money on their costs. So that's why it would be a bad idea to agglomerate. But ultimately, kids, yes, all those thoughts I just said are valid. However, agglomeration is just sort of what happens. And the reason why it is a good idea is because society tends to specialize. Okay? If you are an actor and want to make it in the movies, you're gonna move to Hollywood because you know that it's the one city where sort of all that stuff happens. If you are a big tech guy, you want to move to the Silicon Valley area of Northern California because that's where a ton of tech companies are. And companies actually prefer it when all of a specialized group comes together. That way they can all poach off the same talent, and that way they can kind of feed off their other businesses. And I'm sure that the casinos on the Strip actually prefer to be next to the other casinos because typically tourists in Las Vegas, they'll come to stay at the Flamingo and they'll, gamble at the Flamingo. They'll watch a couple shows of the Flamingo, but they'll sort of eventually get a little bored of the Flamingo. And so they are totally fine with the guests at the Flamingo walking into other casinos and experiencing their gambling and their shows and their other stuff while guests in other casinos go into the Flamingo and kind of do the same thing. So it's sort of this like sharing is caring vibe. And that's what agglomeration's all about. And another good point with agglomeration, you'll see agglomeration in a food court in a lot of shopping malls. And I remember thinking to myself when I was a little kid, I was like, why is it that all the restaurants in the shopping mall can be found in the exact same spot in the food court? Wouldn't it make a whole lot more sense to spread those restaurants out so that way if you're on the other side of the mall and you get hungry, you just like take a quick bite of something and then you go to another spot? But the reason why agglomeration just makes sense is because when you and your friends and family go into a food court, each of you then will have the choice of eating at a different little mini restaurant. You don't have to all eat at the same place. And so when there is kind of the same overall theme of a business, but each business does it a little bit differently, it actually really helps all of the businesses together because, everybody goes to the food court, everybody can find something they like. All the businesses benefit from that. So, boom, that's agglomeration right there. Okay, so name that agglomeration. Oh, look, I just talked through like all this stuff. Okay, so this is the agglomeration of manufacturing in the United States. Just about everything we made in the United States, we used to make in these Midwestern states. So all of our refrigerators, microwaves, steel beams, cars, of course, all made there. Okay, and then here's a food court and a shopping mall. So you see all the restaurants are basically right next to each other, and they prefer it this way. So that way when a group of people all come together, maybe only one person in that group is like really hungry and they're like, I'm going to go to Burger King. But then the other people in the group are like, hey, maybe I could have one slice of pizza. So the rest of the group will go to Domino's and share a pizza together, something like that. All of the businesses benefit by being close to each other. So here's U.S. manufacturing plants in China. So you can see almost all the big plants are located along the coast. There's really not a whole lot of plants in the far western China. There's like 2 right there. But why is it that China has all of their manufacturing agglomerated on their east coast? Well, it's because it's close to the water. And you're going to ship this stuff all around the world. So it just makes sense to be close to the ocean. That's logic right there. Okay, and then here's an agglomeration of, well, I don't even know what's going on here. The hottest bar in Pattaya? Whoa. But yeah, so it's all kinds of food restaurants. It's like a big tourist zone, and they kind of like to have it in all one of the same spot. Okay, so agglomeration, the clustering of industries based on the availability, buildup of infrastructure. Yeah, because there's always going to be great infrastructure where there's agglomeration. Mutual benefit of all industries. That's a big concept. All right, Hollywood. So all these movie studios, they're all together in the same part of Los Angeles. And then, yep, the Las Vegas Strip. Hey, all the major casinos in this town can be found along the same street. So, boom. People want to come to Las Vegas. They're always going to hit up the Strip to see all the excitement there is there. Okay, and economic disadvantages. Yeah, see, so there are some disadvantages to agglomeration because it'll put a lot of pressure on one specific spot. There'll be a lot more traffic, a lot more pollution, a lot of high rent. Maybe there could be some labor shortages. But these are some of the negatives, but the positives do outweigh them. Okay, so the high-tech corridor. This is an agglomeration of tech businesses seen in major cities and regions across the country. And the most famous one is, of course, Silicon Valley, near the cities of San Jose and San Francisco in the Bay Area of California. That is the major tech corridor of the United States. But more and more cities are coming up with their own kind of tech corridors. North Carolina has this thing called the North Carolina Triangle, where there's a lot of companies that are based there. Central Colorado is having a lot of new tech companies. I'm quite familiar with North County, San Diego. There's a lot of tech companies that are all based there. In Vegas, I don't really know if we have a high-tech corridor. I know that like the company Zappos moved into downtown Las Vegas. But usually some other kids explain to me other cities they're familiar with, and I ask them, like, is there a part of this major American city where there's a lot of tech companies that are all sort of right next to each other? And I recall other students in the past have told me there are examples of this. Actually, yeah, one of my good friends grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he said that in Pittsburgh they're now having all these new medical companies kind of come to the same part of town. So an agglomeration of tech companies is a pretty typical thing you'll see in many American cities. But Silicon Valley is the most famous one. So here's all the companies in Silicon Valley. Let's see which of these you recognize. Google, hello. Oracle, they make a lot of hardware stuff. I think my cousin works there, actually. Yahoo, Texas Instruments, they make your calculator. Intel, they make the brain for your computer. What else we got here? Facebook's around here somewhere. I think YouTube's around here somewhere too. But I know this is like the big part of Silicon Valley. But yep. Anyway, moving on. Okay, the Colorado Tech Corridor. You're invited. Check it out. And then here's a bunch of big tech jobs around the country. So San Francisco, I mean, that's the Silicon Valley there for you. So, and then North Carolina has a lot. Surprisingly, wow, Alabama? I would never get a tech job at Alabama. I don't know. I'm just a little biased there. And then top technology regions, Silicon Valley, big one. What do they call that? The Silicon Allery in New York. New York already has so much else going on there, though. The Golden Corridor in Chicago, Florida high-tech corridor. Yes, so see, people do stuff in Florida. And Texas is having more and more businesses coming to it all the time, too. Okay, so Auto Alley versus the Midlands Hub. So, yep, once again, so many auto companies were based in the states of Michigan, Ohio, and Ohio. Yeah, Michigan and Ohio. And then some in Canada, surprisingly, as well. So that's where almost all of the cars were made in North America. And alternatively, in the United Kingdom, almost all the cars were made in the very center of England. So, wow, pretty hardcore that agglomeration is a thing. But it makes sense. Like, you want that all these companies go together because, yes, they're going to have access to all the resources they need. But also, if you are usually a car company doesn't make all of their parts themselves. Usually a car company hires another company to make their windows, another company to make their wheels, another company to make their seat cushions. And so if you have all of those side businesses all in the same place, it just makes all the car companies have a more effective system of production. Okay, new industrialized zones. What are we seeing here? So in 1980, where were there new factories? Well, there were some in the United States. There were some in the Soviet Union. Hey, way back there in 1980. But then we get into 2005. 31% of all new industrial zones were in China. China has just dominated the world when it comes to building stuff. But Mexico and Brazil, they're also coming up the game. You know, you see them happen a little bit more, specifically around Mexico City. Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, they're happening. And we see here too, back in the 1980s, the industrialized countries of the world were having 75% of the share of manufacturing. But we get 25 years in the future, and now the developed countries of the world are doing significantly less manufacturing. So China and other developing countries are taking more and more of a role into building stuff in our world today. All right, this is Geography of Transportation. I'll save this for next time. Peace out.